We tend to look at maps as these fixed, logical drawings, just neat lines dividing up the globe, right? But zoom in on Spain, and those clean lines, they completely fall apart. Geography is rarely logical. It's actually a living record of bizarre historical compromises, centuries-old treaties, and sometimes literal shifts in the earth. So welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to challenge your geographical assumptions and dive right into the incredible hidden anomalies surrounding Spain's borders.
So let's start here. How many neighbors does Spain actually have? If you just glance at a standard globe, the Iberian Peninsula looks neatly split. Spain appears to have exactly two neighbors, France capping the north and Portugal hugging the west. But that two-neighbor myth hides a reality that is far more complicated and honestly a whole lot more fascinating. When we really start looking closely at the invisible lines drawn around this nation, we find oddities that break every standard rule of mapmaking.
Okay, part one, the two-neighbor myth and French border oddities.
Now, you might already know what an enclave is. Basically, a geographical island on land, a territory entirely surrounded by a larger, different territory. Well, right in Western Europe, there is a textbook example of this called Livia. Livia is completely Spanish, yet it sits entirely within France, just 2 kilometers away from the actual Spanish border. Why is it there? Well, it all traces back to the 1659 Treaty of the Pyrenees. At the end of a long conflict, Spain agreed to cede 33 border villages to France. But some very clever local diplomats pointed out that Livia technically held the legal status of a town, not a village, thanks to this ancient decree. And because of that single semantic loophole, Livia remains Spanish. To this day, its citizens actually have to commute through France just to get to the rest of their own country. Moving further west along that exact same border, we hit an even wilder case, Pheasant Island. Back in that same 1659 treaty, which, fun fact, was actually signed right on this very island, Spain and France simply couldn't agree on how to divide the land. The river borderline ran straight through the middle of it. So what did they do? They established what's known as a condominium. They decided to just take turns owning it. For the first half of the year, from February to July, the island is completely sovereign Spanish territory. Then, on August 1st, naval officers literally swap the flags, the border shifts, and for the next 6 months, it becomes completely French territory. It's a geographical timeshare, and they've been actively swapping hands for over 350 years.
Moving on to part two, the hidden microstate.
Nestled way up in the Pyrenees Mountains, completely landlocked between France and Spain, is Andorra. With a tiny population of roughly 80,000 people, it is one of the smallest countries in the entire world. But Andorra isn't just a quiet mountain retreat. It's an incredibly unique geopolitical survivor. It originated all the way back in the days of Charlemagne as a buffer state to keep rival empires apart. Today, it operates under a highly unusual system called a co-principality. It's technically ruled jointly by 2 foreign princes, the Catholic Bishop of Urgell in Spain and the President of France. That means it's a completely independent nation whose heads of state aren't even citizens of the country. And to really put the sheer scale of this hidden neighbor into perspective, the entire independent sovereign nation of Andorra is almost half the size of New York City. Think about that. You have a full country with its own parliament, its own laws, and a distinct Catalan culture that would fit incredibly comfortably within the borders of a single American metropolitan area. It survived sandwiched between 2 major European powers simply because its rugged terrain made it too difficult to conquer, and politically, well, it was just more useful to both sides as a neutral, demilitarized buffer. All right, part 3, Britain's southern footprint. Geopolitics rarely respects physical geography, right? Even though the United Kingdom lies over 1,000 miles to the north, way across the sea, it is actually intimately connected to Spain as one of its hidden neighbors. This is all due to the overseas territory of Gibraltar, which is this imposing limestone ridge perched right at the extreme southern edge of the Iberian Peninsula. Now, Gibraltar matters for one massive, undeniably crucial reason. It controls access to the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar. Whoever holds this tiny 6.5 square kilometer rock basically holds the keys to one of the most critical maritime choke points on Earth. It was captured by an Anglo-Dutch force in 1704 during the War of the Spanish Succession, and Spain formally ceded it to Britain a few years later in the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht. Ever since, it has been a heavily fortified British outpost, and, as you might guess, a continuous point of geopolitical friction, purely because of the immense global strategic leverage this tiny footprint provides. Which brings us to part 4, Spain's African borders. So when you cross that Strait of Gibraltar, leaving the European continent entirely behind, you actually haven't left Spain at all. Despite the vast body of water physically dividing the continents, Spain holds a highly unique geographic title. It is the only European nation to share a physical, terrestrial land border with Africa. This continental anomaly is all thanks to Spain's borders with Morocco. Nestled right on the North African coast, entirely surrounded by Moroccan territory and the sea, are three distinct Spanish enclaves. Two of them are the bustling, autonomous cities of Ceuta and Melilla. Now, these have been under Spanish control since the 15th and 16th centuries, long before the modern state of Morocco even existed. But the third territory? It is much, much stranger. It's a tiny, unnamed strip of land attached to a military fortress called Peñón de Vélez de la Gomera. Now, this third enclave has a truly mind-bending origin story. For centuries, this rocky fortress was entirely an island, separated from the North African coast by a stretch of water. It had absolutely no land border whatsoever. But then, nature violently intervened. In 1934, a massive thunderstorm struck the region. The extreme weather washed immense amounts of sand and sediment into the channel, permanently filling the gap between the island and the Moroccan coast. The earth literally shifted, the water vanished, and a narrow isthmus was formed. Nature actively drew a brand new international boundary overnight. And because of all that shifting sand, this newly formed land bridge established the absolute shortest international land border in the entire world. We're talking a staggering 85 meters across. That is less than the length of a football field. It's a brief sprint across a sandy beach that takes you directly from sovereign European territory straight into Africa. It's an international border created not by a treaty or a war, but just by a sudden change in the weather. So today we've seen that the lines on a map aren't just static ink. They are the living outcomes of medieval semantics, bizarre time-sharing agreements, military strategy, and, literally, shifts in the sand. Every border represents a moment where history froze in place. It really makes you wonder what other invisible lines on your world map are hiding incredible stories. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.